Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy. Before I go into tonight's Ukraine update, I'd just like to welcome our guest this evening, Maureen Watt. Maureen, thank you for joining us again.
You're welcome. I'm becoming a bit of a regular, but I'm
And
honored to do so.
thank you. No, really, it's great to have you. I really appreciate it. And so I'm looking forward to hearing your views on tonight's news. So here comes the Ukraine update for day 266. My apologies. A missile yesterday evening on the Polish. Sorry, a missile yesterday landed on Forgive me. A missile yesterday evening was fired on the Polish village of Przewodow near the Ukrainian border, killing two people, Poland's foreign ministry said in a statement. The incident is the first time that the territory of a NATO country has been struck during the near 9-month Ukraine war. Poland's President Andrzej Duda has said that the missile that landed in the country appears to be an unfortunate incident. It was highly probable that the rocket, which was Russian-made, was used by the Ukrainian air defence, he added. President Duda said that there were no grounds to believe that the missile incident was an intentional attack or that the rocket was launched by the Russian side. The Russian Defence Ministry has claimed that it had not targeted anywhere within 35 kilometres of the Ukraine-Poland border. The Russian ministry claimed to have identified the wreckage as a Ukrainian S-300 from photographs. Alexei Danilov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defence Council, said Ukraine is requesting immediate access to the site of the explosion in eastern Poland. He said Ukraine wanted a joint study of Tuesday's incident with its partners. Excuse me. Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, says the Polish missile incident demonstrates that the war in Ukraine, which is Putin's responsibility, continues to create dangerous situations. NATO is constantly assessing its presence in the eastern part of the alliance, he said. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his Canadian counterpart Justin Trudeau spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. They agreed Putin's invasion of Ukraine is squarely to blame for the ongoing violence. Mikhailo Podolyak, the senior advisor to Ukraine's president, said on Wednesday that Russia was to blame for any incidents with missiles because of Russia's invasion of his country. Meanwhile, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said he is satisfied with Russia's claim that it was not involved in the incident in Poland and that insisting that the missiles were Russian-made will provoke this issue. A draft declaration from G20 leaders said most members strongly condemn the war in Ukraine, demanding Russia's complete and unconditional withdrawal from its neighbour's territory. Pope Francis has condemned the latest wave of missile attacks on Ukraine and called for a ceasefire to avert the risk of an escalation of the conflict. Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said Sweden will deliver new military aid worth £242 million to Ukraine, including an air defence system. Russia's foreign ministry said it had banned entry to more than 50 Irish politicians, including the Taoiseach Michael Martin. Russia launched waves of missile strikes across Ukraine on Tuesday as G20 leaders met in Bali. Ukraine's authorities said it was another planned attack aimed at the country's energy infrastructure facilities. So, Maureen, as you can see, the missile attack has dominated today's Ukraine update. I'm just wondering, am I the only one that kind of feels an odd sense of relief when I found out that the missile didn't come from Russia and was in fact Ukrainian?
Well, yeah, I can share your feeling on that. I think if it had been Russian, goodness knows what the escalation might have been. It's a very sad incident, but if Russia are going to continue to bombard cities across Ukraine, including those near the Polish border, then perhaps this is a consequence of that, and hopefully it's just a one-off and can be avoided again.
Yes, and if you go on social media, and are you okay there, Maureen? If you go on social media and have a look at this, then it's full of lots of memes about an upcoming World War III and escalation of that. But so we'll move on to the next story. A package of measures to strengthen the role of women from the Global South in climate action has been announced at COP27 by Environment Minister Mary McCallan. A total of £150,000 will be provided to the WEDO to enable women from the Global South to attend UN climate negotiations at COP28 in Dubai, and to provide women in indigenous communities with the resources to scale up local climate solutions. Speaking at a Scottish Government-hosted panel on the gendered impacts of climate change, the Environment Minister also announced £50,000 to create a new fellowship at the University of Dundee. It will give women human rights defenders from the Global South the opportunity to spend several months in Scotland, where they can continue their work in a place of safety. The Environment Minister also welcomed international support for Edinburgh Declaration. Over 280 governments, cities and local authorities across the world now support an ambitious Scottish Government-led international plan for nature, and it is hoped more will sign up at COP27. The Edinburgh Declaration is a shared agreement to protect and preserve global biodiversity, and has recently been signed by the state of Jalisco, Mexico, with the city of Quebec, Canada, and the city of Sydney, Australia. It calls for strong transformative action at all levels to halt biodiversity loss across the globe, and will be presented at the UN Biodiversity Conference, otherwise known as COP15, in Canada this December. On Biodiversity Day at COP27, Environment Minister Mary McCallan participated in a panel with some of Scotland's Edinburgh Declaration partners to showcase its success and discuss how the plans will be replicated on a wider scale. So, Maureen, I was doing a little bit of digging on the background for this, and it seemed that I was thinking one way to consider this about the role of women in climate change. How do we look at the number of women on corporate boards? That continues to rise, but apparently still quite slowly. And also, it's the number of women that are joining corporate boards apparently is it's not very diverse. They're mostly white females. And so it would seem that men continue to be overrepresented both in boardrooms and governments, whereas women are less likely to be policymakers. You only have to look at the lineups in COP27 to be able to see that. And then, of course, it seems that it's the poor and the vulnerable and marginalised that are impacted most by climate change. And figures seem to say that the majority of the world's poor are women. So I don't know. It seems that the same goes for these people that are mostly dependent on the people that are most dependent on threatened national resources around the globe are women. Do you think this is going to help?
Well, I welcome the Scottish Government's commitment in this area. It just shows you the importance of COP, not just for national governments, but for regional governments, city governments, local government being there, because the people that are working on the ground are the ones that really know what's going on and what is required. And women throughout the world are the doers, and they'll be getting on. Many thousands, millions of women will be getting on with doing the right thing in relation to climate, while the men sit and talk around the COP27 table, or the discussions in Bali. And you're right to notice that there seem to be fewer women this year than in previous years. Perhaps the absence and retirement of Angela Merkel has something to do with that. But however, I welcome this. I welcome the fact that we're going to have fellowships at the University of Dundee. I hope that, and given our relations with countries like Malawi and Rwanda, that people from the global south in those countries will be able to benefit. I was very much involved in the Malawi-Scotland relationship as an MSP. So I think this is another example of the Scottish Government doing rather than just speaking. We've already had the announcements that the First Minister made in relation to loss and damage, and it shows that where there's a will, as there is in terms of the Scottish Government, we're getting on and acting on climate change.
Thank you, Maureen. I was just thinking there that this thing about women who are policymakers, you're right that women on the ground, all around the globe, are what really makes a difference. But the fact that our own First Minister, who is attending COP, but not on par with, for example, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, but still, she is there and she does have a profile. And I was thinking then about King Charles, who has stayed away. Do you think the fact that he's male, he's white, he's incredibly wealthy, and he's not a policymaker? And I would like to kind of compare and contrast him with the First Minister, who is a policymaker and who is out there raising. Do you think her? I suppose I'm hoping she would inspire young women to enter politics and try to make a difference.
Well, I was actually very sad that the King Charles wasn't allowed by Liz Truss to go to COP. His commitment to the environment has been very long-standing, and in some ways he has used his wealth to show the way in what can be done. And he was talking about climate change long before policymakers. So I am very sad that he wasn't allowed to use his position to influence, behind the scenes at COP and give a speech. But you're right about the fact that our First Minister, as a woman, has been showing how we can take forward climate change by focusing on what women do in their day-to-day lives, and how they can improve the environment by making little changes. I mean, one of the things that was very evident in Malawi, for example, is the amount of cooking that is done over trees that are just cut down there and then, not allowed to mature, and get rid of all the resins and things, and that children and the women themselves were then affected badly or adversely by the smoke. So there are things that women can bring to the table, and the more women that can bring things to the higher up tables, the better. But I have great store in, for example, the NGOs, the Scotland Malawi Partnership, that's working in both Malawi and Scotland, and often money from Scotland is channeled through the NGOs so that it doesn't get into the hands of corrupt politicians in countries where we do make donations. And I'm sure that the money that has been announced today, the funding that has been announced today, will go directly to where it can have most impact.
And thank you, Maureen, and again, thank you for bringing it back to what the story really is, what this news item really is about, which is ordinary women working just on a daily basis in their daily lives and giving them a voice at an international setting like COP27. So thanks for keeping me on the straight and narrow there. I'll move on to the next story, the next item. Surging energy bills have sent the UK's annual inflation rate to a 41-year high of 11.1%. Preparing the ground for the cost-cutting and tax rises expected in Thursday's autumn statement, the Prime Minister responded to the highest inflation figures since October 1981 by saying that inflation is an enemy that needed to be faced down. Data from the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, showed the annual inflation rate last month jumped a percentage point from 10.1% in September, despite help provided to households through the launch of the government's energy price guarantee. Dearer food also contributed to prices rising 2% in October alone compared with the previous month. That's a bigger increase than the Bank of England and the City had been anticipating. Milk, cheese, and egg prices rose by more than 27% compared with a year earlier. The annual inflation rate has more than doubled from its level of 4.6 a year ago and is more than 5 times higher than the government's 2% target. Core inflation, which strips out food, energy, tobacco, and alcohol, remained unchanged at 6.5%. The ONS said households were now paying 90% more for gas, electricity, and other fuels than they were a year earlier. Food price inflation rose from 14.6% to 16.4%, its highest level since 1977. The Resolution Foundation, a think tank that focuses on issues affecting low and middle income families, said inflation was hitting the poor hardest. Commenting, the SNP's Shadow Chancellor Alison Thewlis MP said, "Tomorrow's budget must deliver a boost to income's energy support for I'll start again. Tomorrow's budget must deliver a boost to incomes, energy support for low and middle income families, a real living wage, and extra investment in the NHS to help people weather this Tory-made cost of living storm." Once again, households and businesses across Scotland are paying the price for continued Westminster control. She went on to say, "With both the Tories and Labour hell-bent on making Brexit work, there can be no doubt that independence is the only way to escape the long-term damage of Westminster and Brexit." So, Maureen, I was trying to catch up on Prime Minister's questions today, and Angela Rayner put this question to Dominic Raab, who was standing in for the Prime Minister. It's not a question really, but she said, my favourite quote of her stint was, "Every pound hidden in a tax haven is a pound lost from the pockets of working families." And then perhaps more to the point, Kirsten Oswald, SNP MP, also at PMQs, said, Prime Minister Sunak was asked 6 times if he'd apologise for the economic misery caused by the Tory government's mini-budget. Would Mr Raab do it for him? Mr Raab didn't answer the question. And then she went on to say, she went on to ask, if the government cannot even say sorry for the mess they made, what hope is there that they will fix it? So, I mean, I'll just ask that question of you. If they can't even say sorry for the mess they've made, what hope is there that they'll fix it?
Yes, they're not going to say sorry. You know, politicians find it, especially male politicians, find it very difficult to apologise, and certainly Tories find it very difficult to apologise. So I wouldn't hold your breath to get an apology. I think it is down to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to see if he will make some apology by actions on Thursday, and that remains to be seen. I mean, I am not holding my breath, and Kirsten Oswald or Angela Rayner, I can't remember who you said, is absolutely right that a pound in a tax haven is not helping the economy in any way, shape, or form. It would be nice if we got some indication that they admit that trickle-down economics simply doesn't work, and that putting money in the hands of ordinary working people just to be able to get by, that's all some people are asking for. I was watching a television clip where it said, I don't want to be rich. I do the lottery. I don't want to be rich, but I just want to be able to get by and just be able to provide for my family. And people are not able to do that now. But if they were given more money in their pockets, they're the ones who would be spending it on the high street, not in tax havens and taking the money out of the economy, which happens by giving money to the rich. So it is also the poorest who are affected most by inflation, because they spend more money, more of their income, a bigger percentage of their income on food and energy. So it will be really interesting to see whether Jeremy Hunt tries to tackle that in the budget statement tomorrow. Yes, it's tomorrow, isn't it? We'll wait and see.
Yes, thank you, Maureen. It is tomorrow indeed. So we're literally facing austerity overnight, is the way it's beginning to shape up. Kirsten Oswald, just before I move on to the next question, Kirsten Oswald went on to ask Mr. Rabb if Westminster would match the Scottish Government's child payment of £25 a week. And true to form, Mr. Rabb didn't really answer the question. He said something along the lines, it went something, 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 global crisis was his answer. Moving on to the next item, Rishi Sunak has denied Brexit was playing a role in the UK's economic downturn, which he said should be seen in a global context. The Prime Minister also played down the prospect of any US trade deal in the near future, just days after suggesting he was in no rush to complete a deal with India before he had a chance to re-examine the package. Mr. Sunak told a press conference at the G20 in Bali that he did not discuss any bilateral trade deal at his first meeting with President Biden. The UK government had previously promised a post-Brexit trade deal with the US by 2022. Mr. Sunak said he was filled with optimism about the relationship, but suggested it might take years for any formal deal. The Prime Minister has previously emphasised a new, more deliberative strategy on trade deals rather than attempts to meet arbitrary deadlines. On trade, we had actually a very good conversation with President Biden on a range of things, he said. We didn't discuss a trade deal in particular, but we did discuss our economic partnership. Meanwhile, the SNP has warned that Rishi Sunak's pursuit of an Indo-Pacific trade deal would deliver another hammer blow to Scotland's food and farming industries. Previously, the UK government analysis of the bid to join the CPTPP concluded that joining the trade bloc would wipe millions off the value of the UK's semi-processed food and agricultural sectors. Maureen, I think most people would agree that the pandemic and the war in Ukraine are both genuine factors in the economic situation that the UK is facing at the moment. But to say Brexit had made no difference at all really does mean that this Prime Minister is in denial. The OBR says that Brexit will cause double the damage that COVID caused to the economy. The UK is the only G7 economy that's actually shrinking at the moment. Brexit has ruined the UK's trade internationally and the UK's reputation, I would say. And the pound having fallen sharply against the dollar since the Brexit referendum. Do you think that if Brexit had never happened, we wouldn't be facing austerity tomorrow?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be as bad as it is. I read somewhere that Brexit is responsible for about 5% of the current inflation, and that would be about right because France's inflation rate is about 5, and ours is into double figures. So Brexit has definitely caused the worsened the situation that we're in compared to other countries in relation to COVID and the war in Ukraine. But the Tory, not only Rishi Sunak, but the whole Tory government and Tory membership is in denial about what the damage that Brexit has caused. And it would appear that the mainstream media, and much of it has been told not to blame Brexit for anything either, because you never hear it mentioned as a cause on the BBC, for example. So, the electorate aren't stupid. They can make up their own minds and they can see the damage that Brexit has done. And certainly in terms of Scotland's food and drink industry, we can see the damage that has been done. And if it ever recovers, well, if it does recover, it will be due to Scottish independence and rejoining the EU, because at the moment, for many, many suppliers of our food and drink, it just isn't possible to get in, to re-enter the EU market. And just on this topic as well, I was listening to something in the Commons yesterday, and the former Agriculture Minister, George Eustace, was complaining about how bad the deal with Australia is that Liz Truss struck as International Secretary. So I'm glad that other deals aren't being rushed, because if they're as bad as the Australia deal, then it's going to make it even worse for our agriculture and food sector.
Yes, that was an interesting slip that he made. I think the words that he actually used was, "Now that I don't have to put a gloss on things," which translates perhaps as, "Now that I don't have to lie for the government." Yeah, it was quite something. But best move on to the next item. A return to austerity would have significant consequences for people and public services, Deputy First Minister John Swinney has warned ahead of the UK government's autumn statement. Mr Swinney has called for an alternative to austerity to avoid the UK government prolonging the recession that the Bank of England forecasts may be the longest in 100 years. The Deputy First Minister's other urgent priorities include inflationary increases to devolved governments, 2022-23 budgets to support people, fair public sector pay uplifts and public services, increasing social security benefits in line with inflation in the new financial year, with an immediate and permanent £25 uplift to universal credit and the reversal of the two-child limit and benefits cap. Retaining the triple lock-on pensions, and finally introducing an enhanced windfall tax to fund support for those most in need. Mr Swinney said, "The UK government must not repeat the mistakes of the past. Scotland has already suffered a decade of UK government-imposed austerity, which has disproportionately hurt the poorest and most vulnerable in society. It does not work and will inflict misery on people, put pressure on our public services and hamper our economy." He went on to say, with the UK forecast to enter recession in the coming months, one, the Bank of England warns may be the longest in 100 years, cutting public spending risks prolonging that recession, hampering efforts to restore the public finances. The Chancellor must rule this out and pursue an alternative to austerity that invests in public services and the economy. Mr Swinney pointed out that Scots are facing exceptional challenges as the cost of living crisis and soaring inflation has affected the Scottish Government's budget, which is now worth £1.7 billion less than when it was introduced last December. Mr Swinney called for an additional inflationary increase in the block grant to support the Scottish Government in addressing these challenges. Mr Swinney added, "The prospects for next year and beyond are very concerning. Reductions in the UK..." Forgive me. Mr Swinney added, "The prospects for next year and beyond are very concerning. Reductions in UK departmental spending on the scale that is being trailed would have severe knock-on impacts on the Scottish budget and our public services. It is vital that the Chancellor takes steps to ensure that people are supported, public services are protected, and devolved governments have the funding to deliver for the communities we serve." Maureen, it struck me that while reading that out, that really Scotland's budgets that comes to Scotland from Westminster via the Barnett formula is very much impacted on whatever Westminster spends. So, for example, if they cut the money spent on the NHS in England, then that means there will be less money coming to Scotland to spend on the NHS here. And also this kind of like chimes with our previous item. But I'll let you, what do you have to say and what do you think about this?
Well, you talked about John Swinney saying a return to austerity. I think we've been in austerity since the crash of 2008. I mean, it's been miserable, and people, as we talked about before, have just been trying to get by, and it's been made even worse by the war in Ukraine and the hike in energy prices. Yeah, the Westminster government, as you say, if it cuts NHS spending, then it cuts. It has an effect on the budget in Scotland. And when they talk about cutting departmental spending, they regard Scotland as a department, so Scotland will have to cut its budget as well. And Scottish finance secretaries have been very good at spending almost right up to the limit of the money, which is why there is very little wriggle room left. But and also because Scotland has tried to help those who need the help most, it's going to be very difficult to find cuts to spending. But it's also, the capital budget being hurt, and that affects the private sector as well, because it's the private sector that builds our schools, our roads, our new hospitals, and everything like that. So if the government isn't spending money in these areas, then private sector companies will be affected as well. So that leads to further recession and downturns in the economy, and a rise in unemployment. So while I understand that the UK government feels that it needs to get the debt under control, doing it quickly is not often the best way of doing it. And as we've seen in the past, where Obama, for example, after 2008, injected billions of dollars into the economy and thereby reduced the length of their austerity. That is one way of doing it, which this government, the UK government, never considers.
Thanks, Maureen. And yes, just what you said there at the end reminds me that there are two words that I often find are interchangeable, and that one is investment, when some other folk would call it subsidy. And I think maybe it's usually not subsidy, it is actually investment. But so moving on to the next item. The SNP has demanded that the UK government stop pegging the price of renewables to soaring gas prices, which could lower energy bills by up to £18 billion a year. Currently, unit prices for all forms of energy are pegged to gas prices, which are rising dramatically in the cost of living crisis. That means that consumers using renewable energy, which is cheaper and more environmentally friendly, are being unfairly impacted by the soaring gas prices. Alan Brown MP, the SNP's energy spokesperson, has written to the BEIS Secretary Grant Shapps, urging him to decouple the price of retail energy, including renewables, from gas prices. Doing so could save businesses £11 billion and households up to £250 a year, according to Energy UK. Commenting, Alan Brown MP said, "Under the Tories at Westminster, the cost of living crisis is growing worse by the day. Inflation is at a record high and rising, food banks have seen record use, and warm banks are being set up across the UK for those who cannot afford to heat their homes." He went on to say, "One way the UK government can ease the pressure on households and businesses is by decoupling the price of retail energy from expensive gas bills. Right now, the unit price for all forms of energy are pegged to gas prices, meaning that those using renewable energy to power or heat their home, which is much cheaper, are still being adversely affected by rising gas prices. The UK government must urgently fix this unfair system. Doing so could lower energy bills by up to £18 billion a year and benefit both businesses and households, according to Energy UK. He went on to say, "Beyond that, it must also address the unjust system that sees consumers in Scotland pay higher standing charges. It is ridiculous that this is even the case, and shows that only with independence and ridding ourselves of Westminster, governments will consumers in Scotland ever get a fair deal." So, Maureen, there's a lot to unpack here in this item. I've got notes to explain that Ireland is also an renewable energy-rich country, and has just entered into a global offshore wind alliance. And Ireland produces 5 gigawatts they hope to produce 5 gigawatts by 2030 from renewables for their energy security. But John Robertson, on Talking Up Scotland, tells us that with only 2.7% of the population of Europe, or the EU, Scotland will have 47% of the wind power, and that we currently produce 10 gigawatts of power with a further 25 in the pipeline. So Scotland, by 2035, will have 46% of the EU's renewable production. Scotland is only 2.7% of the EU's energy. Sorry, there's a voice in my ear that's saying that the North Sea Basin. Anyway, I really need to let you come in here rather than have the viewers listen to me drone on about percentages and population figures. What do you have to say?
Well, I absolutely agree that the renewable energy prices should be decoupled from gas prices. Um, I mean, as you say, there's so much to unpack here. It is, what's the point of having renewables? Um, okay, for climate change, it's absolutely great. If we're not going to see benefits for consumers, they've had to have a surcharge on energy bills in order to pay for renewables, but now renewables can be produced at the same or lower than gas prices. So something has to be done. But I have long thought, as have many other people, that Ofgem is the bogeyman here, because it its way of working has been based on the way energy was produced decades and decades ago, rather than coming up, uh, organizing itself in relation to where and how energy is produced now. Having to pay in Scotland to put energy into the grid, whereas Cornwall gets paid for putting energy in the grid, is absolute madness. I did see a flicker of hope yesterday, I think it was, when asked about this. Jeremy Hunt said that it was something that should be addressed. But there again, their to do list is so huge. How far down their list of to do things it is, I would say it's probably pretty far down and not something that really needs fixing in the short term rather than the longer term.
Thank you, Maureen. Another similar or related item here now. The electricity generator and network company SSE has reported a more than tripling of profits thanks to soaring energy prices, a day before the government is expected to expand a windfall tax on the power sector. The Perth-based company runs gas-fired power stations alongside hydroelectric plants and wind farms. They reported a 221% increase in adjusted pre-tax profits this year on year, to £559 million in the 6 months to the end of September. SSE has benefited from an increase in gas prices in the UK since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The publication of the soaring financial performance at the firm, which in May significantly upgraded its profits forecast for this year, comes a day before the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is forecast to announce a 40% windfall tax on excess returns being made by electricity generators. SSE attempted to play down the profits increase by saying it invested a record £1.7 billion on energy security and sustainable energy projects. They went on to say cheaper, cleaner and more secure energy is coming. It just needs to be built, and SSE is building at pace. Alistair Phillips-Davies, the chief executive, said, with a supportive government policy environment, SSE alone could invest more than £24 billion in Great Britain by the end of this decade. Speaking on BBC Radio Scotland this morning, Mr Phillips-Davies said SSE's added his backing to calls for the price of renewable energy to be uncoupled from the more expensive market cost of gas. SSE is in the process of selling a 25% stake in its power transmission assets to raise cash to build more renewables generation as it focuses on wind and hydropower in Scotland. SSE said it expected to reach a sale agreement in the coming weeks. It is also constructing the Seagreen offshore wind farm, which will be the world's largest, and developing a pumped hydropower plant at Glass in the Highlands. So, Maureen, at a time when families are struggling to pay for the cost of energy, companies like SSE are making obscene profits. I'm tempted just to ask you, is Ofgem still the bogeyman here?
Good point. But well, I mean, SSE are making profits because of the price of gas and energy. And I think, to be fair to SSE, anytime I've heard their directors, they have almost been calling out. I'm sure it's Mr. Anderson of SSE who's more or less been in front of committees in the House of Commons saying, please tax us because we are making these excess profits. So do tax us on this. But I think there is a lot that energy companies themselves can do. I I was watching a program, one of Martin Lewis's programs, where he had Octopus Energy on and all of the things that they were doing to try and help their customers and giving away some free things and blankets, I think it was, or electric blankets or something to help their customers. So I think there's lots that the energy companies themselves could do further than um, giving. They organise the reductions in relation to the government grants for this, but I think there's lots that energy companies could be doing themselves, especially in relation to their poorer companies. I mean, poorer customers. For example, getting people off meters, where typically those on meters pay £1 and 5 pence, where the rest of us or prepayment meters, whereas the rest of us just pay £1. So I think they could make sure that the poorest customers are not paying more for the energy that they buy from the companies. So I think, as I said, there's lots that energy companies themselves could be doing through their corporate social responsibility element of their companies.
Thank you, Maureen. So we're a wee bit behind, so I'll move straight on to the next item. Donald Trump, who has mounted relentless attacks on the US democratic process since his 2020 election defeat, launched a bid to try and win the Republican nomination for the 2024 presidential race in an attempt to preempt potential Republican rivals. Trump, excuse me, Trump made his announcement at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida last night, a week after midterm elections in which the Republicans failed to win as many seats in Congress as they had hoped. In a speech lasting little more than an hour, Trump spoke to a gathering of supporters in a ballroom decorated with chandeliers and lined with American flags. Trump laid out familiar dark themes from his playbook, denouncing migrants and portraying American cities as crime-ridden cesspools of blood. He said he would push for the death penalty for drug dealers and rehire members of the military who had been dismissed for refusing to get the COVID-19 vaccination. Although he assailed the US election process, Trump did not use his speech to revive his false claims of voter fraud in 2020 and did not mention the attempted coup by his supporters on January the 6th, 2021 to prevent Congress from certifying Biden's victory. At the G20 summit in Indonesia, when asked if he had a reaction to Trump's announcement, President Biden said, "Not really." So, Maureen, let's keep this in perspective, or we should at least try to keep it in perspective. There's an organisation in America, a news organisation called the NPR, which stands for the National Public Radio in the United States, and they reported this story and how it should be reported all the time, I think, everywhere. Their headline said, "Breaking: Donald Trump, who tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 presidential election and inspired a deadly riot at the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep himself in power, has filed to run for president again in 2024. I'll give you that courtesy of Mr. James O'Brien on LBC. He used it today on his show. But Trump can't succeed in his presidential bid without the votes of Republican supporters. Do you think he'll get that support?
Well, when I heard this, I thought it's not God bless America, it's God help America. Um, I think, given the results in the midterm elections, where usually the incumbent government, in this case the Democratic Party, does badly. In fact, the Democrats have done much better than was anticipated. So you would think that might have led him to have second thoughts or at least delay this announcement, but clearly it hasn't done. But I think there are enough Republicans now although he still has a very strong base who are deniers and don't recognise the damage done by the riot in Capitol Hill, and of course the outstanding legal uh, um, things that he has to face. So I think there are probably going to, hopefully, there are enough sane Republicans who will see that he is not the candidate that they should be putting forward to run against Biden in 2024, I think it is. So hopefully, people like Ron DeSantis do um, put their nomination in, and we will see a decent field of candidates. Interesting, Brian, I noticed that his daughter Ivanka said that she wasn't having anything to do with this race of her father, not taking an active part in this, which I think maybe tells you something.
Yes, does sound like a good indicator. And as you say, he's got an active interest in becoming the president once again, because then he'll be safe. He won't face those charges, those criminal charges and investigations that he's facing at the moment. So it's another reason maybe why he's been quick out of the traps. But so anyway, the next item. The Charities Regulation and Administration Bill aims to increase transparency and accountability and improves the powers of the Office of Scottish Charity Regulator, the OSCR. As part of the proposals for Oscar, there will be they will publish annual accounts for every charity. They'll include the names of all charity trustees in the Scottish Charity Register. They'll be able to remove charities that fail to provide accounts and don't respond to Oscar's communications. And finally, they'll create a publicly searchable record of removed charity trustees. The legislation will also give Oscar new powers to issue positive directions to a charity to take action, such as managing a conflict of interest, where a risk has been identified by the regulator. Social Justice Secretary Shona Robeson said, "Charities play a vital role in our society, from supporting individuals and communities to informing policy at a national level." Current charity law is now 17 years old, she went on to say. The charity sector has changed significantly in that time, and the legislation needs to be updated to reflect that. Charities have told us that they want these changes to help strengthen existing charity law and update the system of regulation. Scotland's charities raise more than £13 billion of income each year, and this bill will give the public further transparency as to how that money is used. So, This this has just got to be all good, hasn't it, Maureen? But how will these changes help improve things?
Well, as you said, the current legislation is about 17 years old, and things do change and move on. And obviously, this new bill is required to bring things up to date. And as you said, it will be the charity sector themselves that are asking for much of this change. So I welcome this, and it does mean, if it means, as you say, more openness and transparency of the charity sector, that is very welcome, because there are charities who may well be getting public funds to help them deliver their services, who are not open and transparent. And it is absolutely vital that if they are getting public money, that there is openness and transparency, and that people know, as you say, who the trustees are and how that money is being spent. I can say that as a minister, I came across situations where it was not totally transparent, where the money that they were getting, not just through public subscriptions and public donations, but also public money from the governments, that it wasn't always transparent and apparent where that money was going. So I welcome legislation in this field.
Thank you, Maureen. So moving on to our final item of the evening. A new poll has shown support for independence as the clear preference for Scots as the chaos of Brexit bites. An Ipsos Mori poll, which surveyed more than 2,000 Scots, showed 54% of those expressing a view would prefer a yes vote for independence over just 46% who would prefer a no vote. The poll also shows the highest ever poll rating on the economic benefits of independence. The poll also revealed that 4 in 5 Scots expect the general economic condition of the UK to worsen in the next 12 months compared to 73% in February 2022. Scotland's Constitution Secretary Angus Robertson said, "People in Scotland know exactly what Westminster control means. It's continued economic chaos imposed by successive Tory governments that Scotland has rejected since the 1950s. He went on to say, "The cost of living crisis only compounds the economic catastrophe of Brexit, the damage of which this shambolic Westminster government has only served to accelerate, and which Labour, as a pro-Brexit party under Keir Starmer, is fully signed up to. People instinctively know that decisions about Scotland should be made by the people of Scotland, and that independence is the opportunity to get rid of Westminster government we don't vote for good. And Westminster's Trump-like bid to deny democracy by blocking the people of Scotland having their say in an independence referendum simply will not hold." So, Maureen, I've got two thoughts bouncing around my head at the moment, and one is there's like a tale of two referendums, which I think is going to impact on this or influence this. One was the independence referendum in 2014, and then the other was the more recent European Union referendum in 2016. In 2014, Better Together promised us lower energy bills. How's that going? And then in 2016, Brexiteers or pro-Brexit people said that if we left the EU, then food would be cheaper outside the EU. So I think that's kind of got to sort of feed into what people decide when they come to answer polls like this. I don't know. I'm rambling again. What do you think?
Well, I welcome the results of this poll, and I note that the number of people polled is almost double what Ipsos Mori and other polling organisations would normally do. So it gives that bit more credibility. I think that more and more Scots are seeing that Tory governments are the norm. We never vote for them. We haven't done since 1951. Despite that, we always get a Tory government. And the Tories have really shot themselves in the foot by showing over the past few months how irresponsible they have been with the economy. They always trumpeted that they were better at managing the economy than a Labour government. Clearly, it's plague on both your houses, both Tory and Labour at Westminster. And yet, in contrast, we see the Scottish Government showing stability, showing clarity of direction. And I am not surprised that more and more people can see that independence is a viable option. And I think the papers that the government have been publishing recently have compared and contrasted us with other small European countries and shown how they manage with smaller populations, with fewer resources, than we have in Scotland. So I think it is little wonder that support for independence is growing, and long may it continue. And hopefully this time next week, we will have had a favourable declaration from the Supreme Court on us holding a referendum.
Yes, I heard that literally just before we came on air. The decision from the Supreme Court is due to come out next Wednesday, so that'll be interesting. But sticking to the story that we've got tonight. I'm not a psephologist, and I'm far from, Professor John Curtis. But one of the things that intrigued me about the poll, we didn't mention it in our item, was that there was a question, a number of people that answered that they don't mind either way, whether Scotland becomes independent or not. And it was broken down against the people in the four nations. So in England, 29% said they don't mind either way. In Wales, 27% said they don't mind either way. And in Northern Ireland, 26% said they don't mind either way. In Scotland, that was only 4%. So it seems that most people in Scotland have pretty much made up their mind either way. And we're going to have to, both sides are not going to be fighting over like that middle third anymore. How do you think that's going to affect the campaign when it starts?
Yeah, I think there was also a category, if I remember rightly, of don't knows as well as those who didn't mind either way. So, if you take into account those, um, then that gives a bit bigger pool of people who haven't quite decided. But you're right, there is still an awful lot of work to do. But as I go around the doors, finding out how people are thinking, there are a lot more people open to the idea of independence than there were in 2014. And you're right, there's still a lot of convincing to be done, but it's not insurmountable. And when you think about it, we're starting from a much higher base than we were in 2014. It was 30 something percent of people who were pro independence. Now, as you can see, it's well above 40, 50. It's been consistently round about that in recent polls. So it's a great stepping off point for an independence referendum. And we know that as we are in the campaign, we can persuade a lot more people. And I think people are less likely, as you said, Brian, to be scared by the figures coming from Westminster, because since 2014 and because of 2016 referendum, they have absolutely been shown to be lying.
Yes, and it's interesting to look back at the promises that were made by Better Together and by those who were pro-Brexit. But so anyway, thank you, Maureen, once again for joining us. It was really insightful, your answers, and I hope that we can have you soon again. But maybe we need to give you a rest. So we don't want to wear you out, but it's good to have you. So, so well, that's
Thank
it.
you very much for having me.
No, not at all. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So that's us. That's it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on your generosity, the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, then please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. So good night and thank you for watching. And tomorrow, I think it'll be, I'm not sure who's in the hot seat tomorrow night, but join us again and we'll see you then. Good night.